The moment your core body temperature drops below 35 degrees Celsius, your brain begins making decisions that will kill you. This is not a metaphor, and it is not an exaggeration. It is a clinically documented physiological cascade called hypothermia, and what makes it uniquely lethal among all cold weather threats is that it systematically destroys the very cognitive architecture you need to recognize and respond to it. People who die of exposure in winter survival situations do not typically die because they lacked the physical resources to survive. They die because the cold degraded their judgment before they understood what was happening to them, and because the shelter they either built or failed to build did not address the 4 simultaneous heat loss mechanisms that winter environments deploy against the human body without pause or mercy. Understanding shelter, in a genuine survival context, means understanding thermodynamics, material science, ground physics, and human physiology simultaneously. And the vast majority of people who believe they understand winter shelter have internalized a version of it that is dangerously incomplete. The misunderstanding begins with the word itself. Most people, when they hear the word shelter, think of walls and a roof. They think of enclosure. They imagine something that keeps wind out and keeps rain off, and they measure the quality of a shelter by how well it performs those two functions. That mental model is not wrong. It is simply radically insufficient for winter survival conditions, and the gap between what most people think shelter means and what shelter must actually accomplish to keep a human body alive in sub-freezing temperatures is precisely the gap in which people die. A structure that stops wind and repels precipitation while failing to address conductive heat loss through the ground, convective heat loss through uninsulated air volume, and radiative heat loss through exposed surfaces will still kill the person inside it, just more slowly and with the cruel addition of false security. The person lying inside a tent on frozen ground with a thin sleeping pad, feeling the wind stopped around them, experiencing a subjective sense of shelter, can be losing body heat at a rate their system cannot sustain, and they will not feel the danger clearly because the cold is already narrowing their perception. The hidden science here is grounded in basic thermodynamics that emergency management training addresses but that popular survival culture consistently underemphasizes. The human body loses heat through 4 distinct physical mechanisms. Conduction, which is direct contact heat transfer to colder surfaces. Convection, which is heat loss to moving air or to the larger air volume within an uninsulated space. Radiation, which is infrared heat emission from the body's surface outward toward colder surrounding surfaces. And evaporation, which accelerates heat loss through moisture on the skin and in the respiratory tract. A survival shelter that is genuinely engineered to keep a person alive in winter conditions must address all 4 of these mechanisms simultaneously and with deliberate material and structural choices. The failure to address even one of them creates a thermal leak in the system that compounds over time, and in sustained winter conditions, compounding thermal inefficiency is not a comfort problem. It is a survival threat with a measurable timeline. The evidence for this is encoded in the traditional shelter architectures of every culture that has survived in cold climates across human history. The igloo does not succeed because it is made of ice. It succeeds because its dome geometry minimizes interior air volume. Its snow mass provides extraordinary insulation against conductive and radiative loss. Its low entrance tunnel creates a cold trap that prevents convective exchange with exterior air, and its smooth interior surface limits radiant heat escape. Every one of these features addresses a specific heat loss mechanism through deliberate engineering. The underground pit shelters used across Siberian and Arctic indigenous cultures succeed for the same reason. The Earth itself, below the frost line, maintains a temperature dramatically warmer than the surface air, and a shelter built into that thermal mass exploits geothermal stability as a free and inexhaustible heat source. These are not primitive solutions. They are sophisticated thermodynamic systems developed through accumulated empirical evidence over generations of survival necessity, and they encode principles that modern emergency shelter design has validated repeatedly through controlled environmental testing. The survival implication of this is immediate and urgent. Before winter arrives, not during the first storm, not when temperatures have already dropped to dangerous levels, but now, while conditions allow deliberate and unhurried construction, the architecture of your shelter system must be planned and if possible built against all 4 heat loss mechanisms as a unified engineering problem. The ground beneath you is not a neutral surface. It is an active thermal drain capable of pulling more heat from your body per hour than the open wind above you, and any shelter blueprint that does not begin with ground insulation as its first and most critical layer is a blueprint that has already failed at its most fundamental requirement. Ground insulation is not a comfort upgrade. It is the structural foundation of any winter survival shelter system, and the physics behind this statement are precise enough to be expressed in measurable numbers. Bare frozen ground conducts heat away from a resting human body at a rate that can reduce core temperature by as much as 1 degree Celsius every 30 to 40 minutes under sustained contact conditions. That rate accelerates as the ground itself cools from absorbed body heat, creating a feedback loop in which the longer a person remains in contact with insufficiently insulated ground, the faster they lose heat, and the faster their core temperature drops toward the hypothermic threshold where cognitive function begins to deteriorate. The minimum effective insulation depth between a human body and frozen ground, calculated against the thermal conductivity coefficients of natural materials available in most temperate and boreal environments, is approximately 10 to 15 centimeters of dry organic material, leaves, dry grass, pine boughs, or cattail fluff, compressed beneath the body's full contact surface. Below that depth, conductive heat loss exceeds the body's sustainable replacement rate during rest, and rest during winter survival is not optional. Sleep deprivation compounds hypothermia risk by degrading the metabolic and thermoregulatory functions that maintain core temperature, meaning a shelter that does not allow safe sleep is not a survival shelter. It is a slower version of the open environment. The second architectural layer that most survival approaches critically underemphasize is interior air volume management. This principle comes directly from building science and from the thermodynamics of enclosed spaces, and it operates on a rule that is counterintuitive to most people raised in large modern buildings. In a survival shelter operating without an external heat source, smaller interior air volume is not a limitation, it is a thermal asset of the highest order. The human body at rest produces approximately 80 watts of metabolic heat. In a shelter with an interior volume of 1 cubic meter, roughly the size of a well-constructed debris hut or a small snow shelter, that 80 watts of continuous heat output is sufficient to raise and maintain interior air temperature significantly above exterior conditions. Because the small volume limits convective mixing and the well-insulated walls prevent that accumulated warmth from radiating or conducting outward. In a shelter with an interior volume of 10 cubic meters, a standard camping tent with standing room, that same 80 watts of metabolic output is distributed across 10 times the air mass, producing a temperature differential above exterior conditions that is negligible and therapeutically useless. This is why the debris hut, properly constructed with a body-fitted interior and walls packed to 30 centimeters of insulating organic material, can maintain interior temperatures 20 to 30 degrees Celsius above exterior air temperature using no heat source other than the occupant's own metabolic output. It is not magic. It is applied thermodynamics operating on a deliberately engineered scale. The misunderstanding that prevents most people from building shelters at this level of thermal efficiency is the deeply ingrained psychological association between comfort and space. Human beings in non-emergency conditions consistently prefer larger enclosed spaces because spaciousness communicates safety, status, and freedom of movement. That preference, transferred uncritically into survival shelter construction, produces structures that are too large to be thermally self-sufficient, too tall to accumulate ground-level warmth, and too voluminous to be heated by the only reliable heat source available, the human body itself. Overcoming this bias is not a matter of willpower or roughing it. It is a matter of understanding the engineering reality clearly enough that the correct choice becomes obvious. A shelter that fits your body like a shell, that requires you to crawl to enter, that feels confining and close from the inside, is performing thermodynamically at a level that a larger, more comfortable structure physically cannot match without an external heat source. And in a genuine winter survival situation where fuel is limited or absent, the shelter that does not require external heating is not the primitive option. It is the advanced one. The escalating reality of winter survival architecture is this: every hour that passes after temperatures drop below freezing without a thermally complete shelter in place increases the physiological cost of construction, because the cold is simultaneously degrading the manual dexterity, cognitive clarity, and muscular output needed to build effectively. Hands lose fine motor control at skin temperatures below 15 degrees Celsius. Decision-making quality drops measurably as core temperature falls below 37 degrees. Muscular efficiency decreases as the body redirects blood flow from extremities to core organs. This means that the window for building a genuinely effective winter survival shelter is front-loaded. It exists most fully before the crisis is fully apparent, and it narrows rapidly as conditions deteriorate. The blueprint must be learned, internalized, and rehearsed before winter arrives, because winter does not provide a grace period for those encountering its architecture for the first time.